The Core Ultra launch has been interesting. This is a Core Ultra machine. If this were an episode of Star Trek, this would be with a goatee from the Mirror Universe. You see, we took a look at the Falcon Tiki that's based on the 9800X 3D, but this is a Falcon Tiki based on the Intel Core Ultra 285. Now you may be wondering, what's with all the Intel 285 content? Look, Intel, morbid curiosity, but also I wanted to eat my own dog food. That's the point of the Falcon Northwest system. Let's put it in a system. Let's actually use it, not a test bench. And so this has been the several weeks challenge for me. Can I survive using the Core Ultra 285? Bottom line, I'm pleasantly surprised. Not just the gaming stuff, but also productivity. Let me catch you up to now. 24 cores, 24 threads. AMD at the time that I do this video doesn't really exactly have an answer to that. They have the 9950X, which is 16 cores, and they have the 9900X 3D for gaming, which is 8 cores. And to be sure, the 9900X 3D takes the gaming crown, but I'm very impressed with how far Intel has come. And the 285 surprised me a lot, because the 285 shows that the 285K is pushed well beyond its limit for not really delivering a ton. Like, you can get a little bit more multi-core performance out of it, but at the end of the day, the Core Ultra 9 285 is 16 efficiency cores and 8 performance cores. And there's no hyper-threading or anything like that. So 24 cores, 24 threads. And that is a little easier for the operating system to manage. At the same time, when we get into the benchmarks, we'll see that, yeah, the gaming performance actually has improved substantially. Not in absolute frame rates, but in terms of performance consistency, 1% lows. And yeah, this actually does work really well in the system, even with the 5090 running at 600 watts. So this is a little bit productivity machine, a little bit gaming machine, or more productivity than gaming. And right now, you know, we're waiting on AMD's 9800 or 9950X 3D and to see how that shakes out. It's also interesting that Intel launched the Core Ultra 285 kind of a ways after the 285K. I think they were hoping for more firmware and other improvements that they could point to and say, look, the single thread performance has improved dramatically. And actually the single thread performance, this is a really interesting segue. The single thread performance actually has improved dramatically since launch if you were using any of the power save modes or if you were using any of the out of the box configuration. And that was because the power performance profile stuff in the launch configuration of the 285K was not good. And so the CPU just wasn't waking up in time. It was spending most of its time sleeping. That took management engine updates, that took firmware updates, BIOS updates, the whole 9 yards. That is well behind us now. And if you're interested in those kind of platforms, you'll know that I've been reviewing other LGA 1851 Intel platform motherboards. The other reason that I wanted to do this video is because the Intel platform motherboards are better. And this is annoying. There should be good parity for motherboard features between AMD or Intel, so you can make the choice that best fits the thing that you're trying to do. But generally, the Intel motherboards are better. They have more features. The BIOS is more well put together. The platforms, there tend to be less BIOS bugs. I don't want that to be true. That's probably just a personnel problem, or maybe a victim of AMD's own success is the situation that they find themselves in. Or possibly it could be the board partners were like, yeah, Intel's going to pull this out at the end. They're going to have something to grant. And then the Zen 5 launch was a little sketchy, but then AMD was able to pull that out in the end. And, we get operating system updates. It's interesting because the Zen 5 warts and the Intel warts both hinged basically on software and platform updates. Now, on the Intel side, it was a little bit more Intel and a little bit more Microsoft working together to solve those problems. And on the AMD side, it was mostly Microsoft because, boy, those Linux benchmarks on launch day for Zen 5 were amazing. But that is neither here nor there. This system is amazing, and it runs really well. And the Core Ultra 285 is actually a legit CPU. I feel kind of bad because it's got a bad reputation, but it's actually a really good CPU. And you can see here that my performance is really good. It's got the top line memory bandwidth. I mean, I can get over 120 gigabytes per second. The memory latency can be below 80 nanoseconds, which is pretty good for, one of these mixed configurations. To be sure, the 14900K is still the record holder in terms of memory latency, but the 14900K is going to be hard. Like 120 gigabytes per second is much more challenging to do on a 14900K than a Core Ultra 285, especially when we're talking about CU DIMMs. And that's what's in here. Kingston CU DIMM memory running at some absurdly fast speed with tight timings, and that'll show through in the gaming benchmarks. Speaking of which, let's start with artificial benchmarks and talk about that. So the Core Ultra 285 versus the Core Ultra 285K. Oh, and pay attention during this review because I'm going to flip back and forth between 285K launch day performance and 285K performance as it exists today. I've done my best to make that not confusing, but right now there's really, for gaming and basically everything except multi-core workloads, there's really not a lot of performance difference between this Core Ultra 285 with this modest cooler. Do you see the cooler in there? It's nothing. It's not a marvel of engineering. It's just an Intel stock cooler, basically, and it's able to get the job done. There's not a lot of performance difference between the Core Ultra 285K and the Core Ultra 285. And in my opinion, the overclocking headroom of the Core Ultra 285K is one of the worst CPUs from Intel in a long time in terms of overclocking headroom. There's just too many safeties. They're too paranoid after the problems that Intel had with overclockers on the 13900K and the 14900K. And so Intel has really dialed back your ability to turn it up to 11 on the Core Ultra 285K. So the Core Ultra 285, I mean, you can with multi-core performance, like you can make your Cinebench number go up, but in terms of like real world performance, it's harder to get a nice overclock with the Core Ultra 285K versus the non-K. And then we're also going to compare this to the 9800X3D. So anyway, let's dive into those benchmarks. So first up are synthetic benchmarks. We always start with like TimeSpy and Firestrike. And if we look here at our artificial benchmarks, the 285 actually consistently does a little bit better than the 285K. And I think that's because the algorithm on the 285K tries to boost a little bit more opportunistically. And because you're a little bit more power constrained on the Core Ultra 285, those longer running benchmarks will level off after a little while. But Firestrike, it's basically the same score. It is a little faster with the 285K, as one would expect, because Core Ultra 285K versus non-K. But basically, it's an identical score. If we dive into Shadow of the Tomb Raider, there is more run-to-run variance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider than there is a difference between the Core Ultra 285 and the 285 non-K. Now here's one of the first places that we'll talk about launch day Core Ultra 285K, and that is with the Core Ultra 285K on launch, the 1% lows were significantly worse. That's where most of the big performance improvements are here with this platform. The 285 and the 285K today now have basically identical 1% low performance. But when we're talking about frame consistency and everything else, it is a night and day improvement versus the launch day coverage that we did of the Core Ultra 285K. The 285 and the 285K now deliver really amazing performance. And if we look at 1440p and 4K, we see that there's really basically no difference between the 285 and the 285 non-K. And this is just Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We move on to a more modern game like Cyberpunk 2077. It's very similar performance at 1080p and basically identical performance at 1440p and 4K. And remember, this is a custom preset which basically has all of the frame gen and upscaling, DLSS, super resolution. All of that is turned off. This is just the raw performance. If you do want to run with DLSS super resolution, that is, in my opinion, the best feature of DLSS 4. The resolution upscaling is incredible. Like the new algorithm it depends on the game a little bit, because now that the drivers have launched, I can try it in more games. So there are some games that needs a little bit more polish, but generally, and especially in games like Cyberpunk 2077, the upscaling really, it's basically free performance. The frames look really, really good. If you add in frame gen, if frame gen is your thing, it makes sense in Cyberpunk. It maybe doesn't make sense in competitive titles. Time to get some open LDAT and do some testing to see what the latency is actually like with the 240 hertz OLED monitor. But for high refresh rate gaming, multi-frame gen or 2 with a 240 hertz OLED at 4K, that is a subjectively great experience. Objectively, I was still working on that. Get back to me. But overall, this thing gets it done. It's literally a 20-pound machine in a 10-pound package. Other gaming benchmarks that we have basically follow the same suit. The 1% low performance has also substantially improved across all of these other titles from the launch day Core Ultra 285K. Today, the Core Ultra 285K and the Core Ultra 285 are neck and neck in terms of 1% lows, stutter, frame time consistency. And it gives the 9800X 3D a run for its money. Now, to be sure, at 1080p, if we throw in the 9800X 3D results and we start to look at our game breakdowns with Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Cyberpunk 2077 and other games in our lineup, well, yeah, the 9800X 3D is the #1 gaming CPU that exists, period. But this is 24 cores, and at 1440p and 4K, it does hold its own. So unless you need some absurdly high frame rate without frame generation technologies, this will get it done. This is no reason not to like this for those kinds of things. And this thing is a little bit of a productivity monster. Look at our Cinebench scores. Cinebench R23 and R24. The Core Ultra 285 is no slouch. Even the non-K version of the Core Ultra 285 is no slouch. If you're doing other CPU-centric tasks, or you have a lot that's running in the background and 8 cores is not going to do it for you, this is a perfectly reasonable option. It's not like you're going to have terrible gaming performance at this point. Although I have to say I was a little surprised that on launch day for the Core Ultra 285 that the gaming performance was not better than it was in terms of like, there's something. But if you dotted your I's and crossed your T's with the operating system and the power configuration and everything else, Core Ultra 285 wasn't terrible. I'm surprised they were able to improve it as much as they have been. But most of the improvements are things that normal people would experience and things that reviewers and people that use computers, like that have a lot of experience using computers, probably would have stepped over anyway. But I could see somebody just, building their first system, tripping over a lot of platform teething issues. That's all gone. And that's probably also why it makes sense to do, Falcon Northwest. And Falcon Northwest has AMD and Intel systems, depending on whether you want regular or mirror universe versions of your gaming system. So there's that. And there's also the productivity side of things. LM Studio with a 32 gig GPU runs exceptionally well. I can run the smaller quantized DeepSeek models that are posted on Hugging Face from Unsloth, the 1.58 bit. It's fair quality. You got to understand that when you're running, the distilled models, you're still running Llama or Qwen or something like that has been trained on DeepSeek. That is not the same as the true DeepSeek model. And to run the true DeepSeek model, you're going to need 640 gigs of VRAM. Not going to do it. For a selectively quantized model, what Unsloth has done is not quantized literally everything, but only quantized the stuff that their utility program research says is unnecessary, which doesn't hurt the model quality too much. And so from 1 bit to 2.58 bits, the quality varies. And using the 2.58 bit model on something that has lots of memory is shockingly good. It's very, very close to the full 640 gig model. But you can run the smaller models on this, LM Studio. You got to jump through some hoops. So for productivity tasks, compiling, Chromium, Visual Studio Code, anything that you want to do in Windows, this is a surprisingly good machine. I'm actually shocked how far it's come. And I don't say that to try to hype up Intel or anything like that. AMD is winning, to be clear. But Intel is doing very, very well with, I don't even like the idea of saying that the 14900 is, better than the 285. Maybe in some gaming scenarios, but the platform updates more cache, especially closer to the processor cores, helps with everyday feel, helps with productivity, helps with just using the machine and having it feel faster. And so, again, these are subjective experiences. This is not objective measurement. We try to do objective measurement and we try to do subjective testing. But having used this machine, forced myself to, I suffered for research purposes. It was really good. The Core Ultra 285 with all of the updates is a pretty good platform. And the non-K version, I have a lot of reasons to like the non-K version, not the least of which is the fact that you can put it in a machine this tiny reasonably, and it doesn't overheat and melt things, even with a 5090 dumping 600 watts of heat into the room when it's running full tilt. Do you get it? It's insane. It's absolutely nuts. So this system has that Asus Strix motherboard in it that I did a video on, and I knew there was going to be crazy comments, but I had no idea that there would be so many crazy comments. There's a ton in there, but there's also a lot of fear-mongering, like, oh my gosh, if you update the management engine before you update the BIOS, or if you update the BIOS before you update the management engine. You can update, yes. If you can do the updates from the operating system, that's fine. That's totally okay. But on a fresh out-of-the-box installation, you don't yet have the operating system. And I think it's the case that very little, if any, shade can be thrown Intel's way when we're talking about productivity machines. This is a good architecture and a good arrangement for lots of cores without moving into something that has 4 or 8 memory channels or something that is a ridiculous amount of horsepower. If you need something that's got a little bit more lift than 8 or 16 cores, this is a little bit faster and the platform is a little bit nicer. I love how so many people are so absolutist when it comes to this. Very little shade can be thrown Intel's way when we're talking about multi-core productivity. It's very, very good. It may be the best, it may not be quite the best, but it's a pretty even horse race. It's a dead heat. They're both pretty solid platforms. And like I say, sometimes the motherboard has more features on the Intel side than the AMD side. It just depends on what you're shopping for. That's not me telling you, yes, you should use this one or you should use that one. It's up to you to do the work to figure out what it is that you're doing. If you sit down and look at it and say, yes, I spend most of my time gaming, you're going to make way different choices than, well, I'm doing work from home and I want my machine to be really fast and I'm doing some programming and maybe experimenting with large language models. You're going to make different choices than you would, otherwise. And so that's the point of this. There are a lot of dogmatic folks with their platform that are just sure that they're absolutely perfectly correct. And it's just like, no one should buy this. But this is an entirely reasonable machine, especially in this configuration, especially I think because I'm not using a K-series CPU. It's a productivity monster and it can game. That's why I had to, spend a couple of weeks eating my own dog food. It's like, I don't know. And let me tell you, in the beginning, I was right there with you after my experiences with the launch day Core Ultra 285K, but things have actually gotten better in terms of objective and subjective experiences. I've got a couple more motherboards lined up to take a look at in the Intel genre, including there's a separate review of the motherboard in this system from Asus. Because again, look, the amazing little hockey puck thing is, okay, there is an AMD version of the board with the hockey puck, like Asus did a reasonable job. But generally, strangely, there are more Intel SKUs than AM5 SKUs, even with the less expensive, B5 or B650 versus B660 chipset, AMD Intel. It's really weird. There's a lot more Intel boards with higher end features, and that's a whole other conversation. But this is a very, very impressive self-contained system running with our 5090. It is by no means bottlenecking the 5090 in just about any scenario. 1080p gaming at 9800X3D would get you a little bit more top-line performance at 1080p, but it's really an academic difference at best, because if you consider the 1% lows, the 1% lows are basically identical between this 285 and the 9800X3D. It's going to be a similar gaming experience. And also, if you run your frame rate at 240 hertz, what your monitor can actually do, well, both of the systems are going to deliver an amazing gaming experience. And this one's got a lot more cores for everything else you might be running in the background or for productivity and work stuff that you might be running. And in this tiny little package, it's very impressive. All right, that's been a quick look at the Core Ultra 285 non-K. Let me know what you think. If I missed anything or you want to see me take anything for a spin, let me know, because this is a permanent system on the workbench and we will be doing other tests and other exciting things with it. So let me know. All right, I'm signing out and I'll see you in the forum.